I've done your assessments for Unit 2, which you'll get that just after the session, maybe by about 12 o'clock. But we'll get on with the third unit, which is managing people, as we started it last time. Just very briefly, in terms of, what we discussed last time was primarily looking at some of the, processes of recruitment and selection, which is one of the roles which, if you wear the HR manager's hat in the office, what you tend to do is basically look at, the various methods of recruitment and selection. So some of the methods of recruitment and selection, do you recall what we discussed?
Yeah.
There were methods like, refer a friend, if you recall. There were methods looking at recruiting through recruitment agencies. There are modern ways of recruiting people now through job boards, as we discussed. And then also sometimes you see that, companies would also look at recruiting people from competitors because they would want staff or people coming in from primarily, set experience with, say, for example, set background and experience, which will help them to, kind of look at jump starting in that role. So in that case, the recruitment process seems to be quite expensive because they're looking at bringing somebody in who, in terms of when I say who, he or she might have a number of years of experience, might be looking at, obviously getting an promotion or a significant raise in salary. And that is what we call sometimes people, when we look at this particular method of recruitment from a company perspective, it is called headhunting. And it's normally done, for senior executives or people, required for key positions or key roles. So that is what we had briefly discussed in Learning Outcome 1. So recruitment process, starts with the process of, obviously HR posting, a job advert. That entails a lot of CVs coming through, and the CVs, the HR managers, the department and line managers people who place that vacancy end up going through that shortlist, and what basis the shortlist, the interview process starts. And then we also looked at how finally, once the shortlisted candidates are put into the organization, the role, they get a job description. And once they get a job description, they get a contract, they get a job description, they get into the company, get inducted, and then go through a period of probation. Once they are past that period of probation, or the trial period as we call it, they are then becoming permanent employees of the organization. We also looked at some key bits of legislation, which is to look at how does, what do we mean by indirect and direct discrimination. So things like, which I mentioned earlier, examples like if you are quoting out a job advert and in that you say that only female candidates apply or only this kind of candidates apply, this seems to be an direct discrimination. Indirect seems to be that women in that same role might be paid less than men doing the same job, and this is something which is indirect discrimination. The pay gender gap, this is something that I think I missed out, but the pay gender gap is now in conversations across a lot of companies in the UK and globally. If you see in BBC, Carrie Gracie, she resigned as the China editor because she felt that I do the same role, and her colleague, his colleague, John Sopel, who's the editor for America, gets more pay, and people who work in different countries or geographies as the chief editor for BBC for that location get maybe higher pay. So she resigned, she won, a case, and then BBC decided to publish, the salaries of most of their, top executives, and then she was given backdated pay to remove this pay gender gap between men and women. So BBC has adopted now a policy along with a lot of other organizations wherein they'll say if men and women are doing the same job in the same type of roles they are doing, then there'll be no, gap in terms of what they get in terms of pay package or salary. And that could be a form of indirect discrimination. And then last but not least, we want to look at, some of the laws which are pertinent for recruitment. When you work in the HR, you look at some of the things pertaining to law and legislation. We look at basically adhering to certain things which HR managers have to look at, things like Discrimination Act, Equality and Diversity, Data Protection, and obviously the Minimum Wage Act. So these are things that we covered in Learning Outcome 1. Is that okay?
Yep.
Now let's go to Learning Outcome 2. In Learning Outcome 2, we are primarily going to be looking at understanding performance and performance management and how that is done within the organization. Now, the next step, if you just step back and imagine for a minute that once a person is in the company, if you work for a particular organization, business, and you have gone past that trial period, how does the company then look at managing your expectation in terms of, your expectation in terms of salary, perks that you get, and in turn, the company's expectation to look at how does the employee perform? How well are you achieving your objectives set? How well are you faring in terms of, the job role or responsibilities which you've been given? So at the end of the year, what most organizations do, sometimes when I say at the end of the year, this is a cliched term. Most organizations today, modern day organizations today, look at managing performance on a weekly and even monthly basis. And the reason why they do that is because they want to make sure that when you work within the company, your contribution towards the achievement of objectives is related to your job description. So if I have to briefly explain that with an example, if you think of a call center as an organization, before we get into the slides, if you look at a call center as an organization, you will normally see that a call center will have a number of call agents, and each set of or each group of these agents, say for example groups of 5, groups of 10, are managed by somebody who is going to be the supervisor. So he or she actually sits towards the end of the line and is able to listen in and monitor the calls which the call center agents or service executives are actually making. And then you will also see that on the same floor, there will also be somebody who's a manager who manages a number of groups to see if they are actually delivering on the daily objectives. Now, the reason I pick up this example of call center is because when you see a call center environment, it is a quite, charged, vibrant, and, passionate environment, because what they look at is on a daily basis, the call center agents are looking at making a number of outbound calls or receiving inbound calls. Their aim is to primarily look at resolving problems, issues. Now, if I look at a sales call center, then most of the calls are going to be outbound. And here, the people who are looking at making the calls, when the automatic dialer actually pushes the call to the agent ends up speaking to the customer on the other side they have not spoken to before. It is down to the skills which are required at the agent or the training which has been given by HR department to be able to perform that role. So they start off by a bit of greeting. You receive a number of these calls. I receive a number of these calls every day. They start off by a bit of greeting. You end up getting a lot of these calls which are coming from payment protection insurance. Have you had an accident and things like that. So their aim is to quickly strike a chord with you. After striking a chord, get you talking, get some information, find out if it's a payment protection insurance, find out if you have ever taken it out, and have you claimed for it back. And this then hooks them. This is the hook which they require for them to pass on this lead on to their manager or the specialist in the organization, who will then follow up with you as a customer, and then this will eventually lead to business. Now, what the call center manager or the supervisor does, let's look at the supervisor first, who's managing a group. He or she is actually constantly listening to those calls to see which agents or the people in his or her team are actually making the effort, to strike a conversation, taking the call seriously, able to, convince the customers, get information out, and also, ask relevant questions, which is able to give them relevant pieces of information. Now, those sometimes in the call center, if I also explain what tends to happen is, the reason I've taken this example is because it is easy to evaluate performance on a daily basis, because what they do is they put up a leaderboard and they'll say, okay, first 5 inquiries for today, when you generate, you go home. You get paid for it, but you also go home early. So that means it's a paid holiday for you, but even though you're not working for a number of hours, but as long as you met your 5 inquiries quota, you're able to, go home. So that is something that you see on the leaderboard. Sometimes you will see 5 inquiries, but out of those 5, 1 getting converted into a confirmed lead or a confirmed customer, taking up their services. Then in that case, you get a bit of an incentive, which will say, okay, free lunch or, free, something which will be a gift, or pick up something from the surprise gift box, things like that. Different call centers will have different things. And then they might also be on the leaderboard, which will say this is a daily tracker. Then this tracker would actually lead on to something like a weekly tracker saying, the best, number of the employee or the call center agent generating the maximum number of leads across the week will be, given a day off or 1 day additional pay, or, some sort of a package. And this could be extended to a month, could be extended to 3 months, 6 months, and an annual competition. Now, what do you think the company is trying to do in this environment? Giving you an example of a sales call center. The company is actually trying to incentivize staff, motivate them, and give them some, let's put it this way, literally a carrot and stick approach to say, if you do this and you get these many leads, you get this in return. So what the company is trying to do effectively is 3 things. One, they're trying to keep the staff motivated. They're trying to put some incentives or, some daily prices or wins that they can do, which allows them to, fuel that motivation and that focus on performing that job. And the third thing which the organization is trying to do is say, let me use the word, they're trying to push all the call center agents to basically perform better or basically be more productive in their role. Now, some days you could see the call center agent goes through about maybe 50, 200 calls, 100, 150, 200 calls, but they don't end up generating a lead because most of the calls that they're receiving from the auto dialer, the customers are hanging up, abusing this, that, whatever it is, they hang up the phone and you don't have a good day. But in order to keep them motivated, okay, you've had a bad day today, that's fine. I've seen and I've monitored all your calls, you've made your effort, but that's fine. It's one of those days. Let's try it, get back. Let's try and give it a try again tomorrow. So what you do then get to see is that the call center supervisor who are managing individual agents are then keeping them motivated, giving them a bit of, one-on-one, say for example, discussion to say, okay, don't worry, it's one of those days wherein you're not having it, but let's give it a try tomorrow. So what they're trying to do is give and raise the morale of that employee to say, okay, this is one day, tomorrow is a new day, let's start afresh and do this. Now, if I just go back and look at 3 things that we want to catch in this example. One is the leaderboard, which is basically having some incentives, prizes, gifts, or whatever the company is doing. The second is the prep talk, which the manager is doing, the supervisor is doing with the employee to say, okay, well done, good job done, or, you've got this as a lead. Now you should strive for getting 10 for this week, and that will make you the best employee of the week, or things like that. And the third thing that we want to look at is sometimes if the agent is not able to perform, the supervisor is having or constantly listening into the calls to see if there are gap areas wherein they require training. Now, if they require training, if the opening sentence is not good, if the phone etiquette is not there, if they're not able to, ask open-ended questions to which customers can reply, you will see that the supervisor will basically put that employee into some sort of training. Now, if this, even after the training and the performance does not seem to improve, say after a month or so, then what they tend to do is basically do a review with the employee to see if the employee is suitable enough to be in that role. And if they do find that he or she is not suitable to basically do that role, they switch that role. They might put him or her into a different role within the center. And if that also does not work out, eventually, the employee is shown the door. That means, you're asked to go. So in the whole process that we look at as an example, what I can see is that this is something which the organization is trying to do from an HR perspective or from a manager's perspective, is to manage the performance of an employee, to keep the employee motivated, loyal, and focused towards doing the activities which they're required to do on a daily basis as per their job description. And this whole process you get to see working in all organizations in some form or the other, just like the example that I've given you of call center, but you will see this process working in all organizations. So if you look at on a call center, you're managing most of these employees on a one-on-one basis. But if you look at a larger organization, which is like a company like, say, I would probably look at, say, Samsung, LG, Apple. You look at all these, big companies, and you look at some of the companies like Apple, for example. Have you been to an Apple store?
Yep.
Yeah. So when you go into the Apple store, you see that there is, when you walk in, there's somebody will check you in, you have an appointment, things like that. So what they pay is a lot of focus on customer service. And most of the employees working in that store would then be, looking at primarily being managed on the fact that they have to provide the best possible service to these customers coming in, so that that service allows them to sell more products and services. So the whole process that you see on the front end, whether you look at a services organization, you look at an organization which is selling products, or you look at an organization which is essentially selling different type of products and services which customers buy. Maybe you buy a new home, you're buying furniture and things like that. In terms of the value of the item increasing, you will see that there is more focus and more I want to use another word, which is more emphasis actually paid by the HR in the organization to make sure that the employees are well trained, they have the skills which are required to perform, and they understand their job description and roles and responsibilities quite well. And this then allows them to evaluate, manage, but also evaluate their job performance on a weekly, daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annual basis. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So this learning outcome 2 is all about trying to understand how organizations carry out performance management. Now, the example that I've given you in terms of the call center, you see this as a measure of performance management being done on the floor level when the employees are working, making calls. But this is done more so on a combination of informal and formal basis. But what we want to be able to do in this learning outcome is to understand what are the various methods to which organizations actually evaluate or perform this concept of managing performance. So the first thing that we look at, if I have to define this term, performance management, what do you think is performance management? How would you define this term as performance? And why do you think that companies need to look at doing performance management? Any thoughts on this?
Well,
okay, I'll give you some hints. So when you look at concepts like, organizations look at savings, they look at, strategic use of resources. Like if you have, say, for example, in the office, if you look at, if there are 2 employees they're sitting in front of each other. So normally you will see there's one handset between the 2 employees, which is shared as an extension rather than have, but if it goes to a managerial level, the person would sit in the cabin and, he has other things to look at. And that is where the organization will provide those various things which are required for the person to be able to perform, because he might have private conversations or conversations with different set of people abroad, outside the company, to bring in business. But people who are performing on a day-to-day basis, you will see them sitting on an open floor plan. And that would mean that, these people primarily look at, sharing resources. So when we look at the concept of performance management, what is it? It is a set of activities, which I would say, or a set of processes which the company has established, which most employees follow in order to improve their output. I will not use the word performance, but I will say output. Like if you're given a task that I want this to be done, and completed, but if you have not given the various tools to be able to do that task. So example, if I say, can you call these 10 customers up today and find out why they have not, liked the product. But if I'm not giving you the phone numbers of the customers or the details of what products they've bought, how would you end up doing the phone calls? Correct? So in this case, what will happen is you will not have anything that you will be able to, do, because you'll look for data, you look for the numbers, or you look for example, the products they bought. But because that information has not been provided to you, you'll end up spending a lot of time doing other things rather than straight away calling the customer. So what this means is, if the organization does not provide you the requisite information in a format which is required and on time, then it will become difficult for you to primarily look at, performing your job. So in this case, when I look at what is performance and how does the organization manage performance, it is to do with the fact that the organization has to give you certain rules or set of processes that you need to follow to be able to do your job well. And so when I look at that particular aspect of managing it, once you've given most of the things to be able to do your day-to-day role, the organization at the end of the month or at the end of the year can actually look at checking how you have gone through on that process, and that process and the checking of that process and seeing and evaluating, at the end of it, Did you do your job? Did you get that target? Did you meet the sales, or did you get those customers? What they're looking at is evaluation, and that evaluation is nothing but performance management. Is that okay?
All right. Yeah.
Now, there are different ways through which, performance management can be done. And performance management is, an approach which a lot of organizations use. It's a process. And this performance management, when you look at, is a 7-step process. So when we look at one of the things that we do, and we have seen that in the organizations, is the concept of something called performance appraisals. In one of the outcomes that you submitted in Unit 2, you've also looked at 360-degree and 180-degree feedback. You also mentioned management by objectives. So when you look at these kind of things, what is actually happening is that, the concept here is that you are basically looking at managing maybe doing an evaluation of how the employee is performing by using a particular technique. And this particular technique could be a performance appraisal that you enter and complete at the end of the year. It could be a feedback or a survey which you have taken and which the HR has asked you to look at taking. This would then allow the person who's managing your or looking at your evaluation to look at your job description and see what responsibilities were you given and how you performed all those responsibilities. So if this is something which is looked at on a structured basis, what you will be able to do is basically manage or look at a structured output which can then be tabulated on some sort of a plan or on paper, and that allows you to basically look at how the employee is performing or how you're performed in a job that has been given to you to complete. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So what I want to be able to do now is just to go into one or two things to basically look at what is the concept and how do we look at managing performance. Now there are different ways. If you have a large business, and sometimes you will see that in the large business, performance is managed primarily using certain tools and techniques. And these tools and techniques that you look at, could be because of the fact that the organization over the years has developed, some sort of a concept, and that concept, has been primarily looked at using as a technical tool to look at, evaluating the performance of the employee. So let me just quickly look at pulling out one or two small handouts which I want to look at, and this is where this handout comes in. This is something which is a concept which was invented by, Robert Norton, and this concept is called the Balance Scorecard. Now I'm going to send this across to you as a template, but here this particular, process of evaluation was primarily devised, to look at making the evaluation of performance quite clinical. That means they wanted to relate it to all aspects of, the management. So that means you include strategic objectives, you include objectives for, the organization. You also look at employment and employee objectives, and also look at customer and customer objectives. So all the 4 pillars were taken into this, and this was then developed into, I'm going to try and quickly pull out in terms of how, but give me 1 second. Just 1 second. I'm going to try and pull out something which I want to show you in particular, and that would be, a balance scorecard. So here the idea is the organization actually looks at putting together in place a system through which they can evaluate the performance of an employee in every department across the organization, and they use one type of technique, and this technique is called Balance Scorecard. So just give me 1 second. Sorry, I should have opened this up before. The other one that you've covered is management by objective. So here the management essentially hands out a clear set of objectives which the employees need to perform, and these objectives are then evaluated at the end of the year to see if the person has been able to achieve those objectives. But against that, what they also look at is they want a set of requirements. That means what kind of requirements do you need to be able to, achieve those objectives. So in those cases, they'll say, okay, I need this. Say, for example, if you're a sales manager and you cover a wide territory, and then in that case, you need to travel quite a lot. In some cases, companies make available a company car, and that is considered as not as a perk, but as a minimum requirement for the organization to be able to, allow the individual to fulfill the objectives. So if I look at this particular, concept of something called, balance scorecard management by objectives, these are techniques which primarily were, created because they incorporate everything which the organization needs to have to make the employee perform in that particular role. So they look at things like the basics of doing the role. So you have a job description, you have basic functions available, like you have a PC, laptop, and connectivity for mobile and things. They have processes which are put in place so that you do not need to look at getting a solution or wait for to get a solution. There is a defined process which is in the organization through a policy or a procedure, and that allows you to quickly respond because it is something which you can refer to as like a manual. So an example here is if you buy a new product from the market, what the companies have done is, because they're selling those in so many large numbers, say for example you buy a vacuum cleaner and you want to now, you open the packing, you open the box, and what you then see is, how do I operate this? So there's a small manual which has been created, which is a user manual by the company, because they're selling thousands and if not millions of these products. What they want them to be, what the consumers to be able to do is, when they open the box, they'll quickly look at the quick start guide or the user manual. They're able to put it together and start using the product. If they had to do this on the phone or send somebody across to your home to explain how this system works, then they will end up spending a lot of costs, and it might not be practically feasible, because what they're trying to do is mass market a product which is selling in thousands or hundreds and thousands on a daily basis. And then these processes which are defined. So when a new product is made, the company, somebody in the design team will also be looking at creating the documentation for it in terms of how the product needs to be troubleshooted, how it needs to be opened, used, warranty. All those things are put in place, because that then becomes a process that, okay, if there is this is what you bought, you register your product, you get this service and warranty for so many days, and this is how you use the service which is provided by the product. And at the top end, the company defines and relates the objectives that you do on a daily basis to the company's mission and vision. That means at the end of the day, the company wants certain bigger objectives to be accomplished. So if I work in the organization and I have 10 other employees who work within the organization, but we have one objective, that at the end of the year, we want more and more students to complete the course, achieve the qualification. And this can happen by a coordinated effort. I might be a tutor, but I might say, okay, I've delivered my session, I've taught the student, but that's my responsibility over. But at some stage, when you send the work in, the assessors have to mark it, and then they say, okay, I've provided the feedback, but the learner has not come back with revised work. At the end of it, the course coordinator will say, okay, I've done my job. Registrar would say, okay, I've done my job. But who looks at it from a point of view of looking at the whole process? Somebody in the organization on a quality side looks at it that everybody's done their role, and because of which the learner is able to achieve the qualification. And the overarching aim of the organization as a training provider is to ensure that we get results. That means we are able to have learners progress in the qualification. So when you look at management by objectives, when you look at some of these concepts like balance scorecard, they take into account each and every aspect of the activity which is required by the employee to be able to perform, and the evaluation is happening on the basis of, has the organization provided enough resources to be able to enhance, has the organization enabled you to essentially perform your role? Have you got the understanding on the processes and the various things which are available in the organization to carry out your day-to-day activities? And towards the end, do you understand the overall goal of the organization? So these things have to be incorporated, and once they are put in place, what you will see is that the performance of the employees actually can be measured using a range of tools. So management by objectives, you look at balance scorecard, 360-degree feedback are different types of tools which HR managers can actually use to manage your performance, or to ensure that you have enough things available to be able to perform well, do your activities or a set of activities well, which finally helps you achieve your aim, and in turn, in the longer aspect, help the organization achieve their aim for which they stand, and sell those products and services in the market. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here, and then what I've done is obviously covered the concept of performance management, how it can be reviewed, the 7-step process, which has been covered in the PowerPoint slide. And the idea of having this on the slides is to make sure that you know a bit of theory in the background in terms of how these are then, how the concept of performance management actually works, by looking at, things like managing self-goals, setting smart targets, looking at different tools and techniques to evaluate performance at the end of the year, which is done depending on where and how you work within the organization.
Yes.
What I'm going to do apart from this is I'm quickly going to look at Moodle, conscious of the time that you want to finish at 11. So I want to quickly look at Moodle to see if I have one or two handouts which are primarily related to the tools required to manage performance, which will be primarily required for the extension activities, how to set smart personal and work-related goals, how to prioritize your workload. There are something called work-based solutions. Things like when you have time management, for example, in the office, which is of utmost importance nowadays. You look at effective delivery of tasks. These are things which are called work-based solutions. So I have one or two handouts which I want to make sure. So they are not here. I'll upload these handouts and email you them along with the the balance scorecard and the management by objectives. And that is something that you can use to basically adapt and study these concepts, especially the extension activities, and then achieve the grade and complete the tasks. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry, it was these, which is performance management techniques, which I'm going to send you, and then an appraisal process, which is a template that is required to be completed in part 2 if you are looking at achieving distinction.
Okay.
Okay. So the 7-step process, which is given here on the PowerPoint slide, I'm going to send you one or two handouts along with this and upload that on Moodle for you to look at.
Thank you.
Okay, good stuff. In terms of the next session, are we looking at Monday, Wednesday next week as well?
Sorry, I think Wednesday we got already booked.
Wednesday, okay.